Much like you, all I wanted was a better quality of fishing, and I was initially motivated and shown the way by these people, some over a decade ago, doing jumbo to bass boats and poor man's bass boat. Homemade bass boat conversions, those names were the ones that were trending, but things have changed. Now there are tiny boats. A lot of dispute has been over what a tiny boat is. What a tiny boat is to me is a max efficiency, hold nothing back build. You cut no corners. You understand that no matter what you make your boat out of, wood, aluminum, fiberglass, there has to be a certain sequence of moving parts in an algorithm that makes it all work. When you follow it, you can get an absolute monster of a platform. You can turn a boat that might look overweighted, but is likely lighter than everything else in the competition. Something that actually performs well under the conditions it's meant to serve in. Now you have a tiny boat. A trend pushed by a world of people so utterly dedicated to the love of fishing that they're willing to take on one of the hardest projects that they could do in their lives, just to gain the edge in the sport. It is because of all of you who follow this trend that tiny boats are now the norm. They are now the standard. People have always tried to overcome the main cultural norms of the fishing industry, neglecting anybody with a small boat like this. But this time, we are really sticking it to them. We are now a counterculture that has hit critical mass, and now everybody's trying to catch up. Some from the main culture even try to tag our name to try and expand their realm in effort to catch up. But this realm will never belong to bootleggers. The Tiny Boat Nation is home now to millions. People who are dedicated to this sport, people who are creative, people who are passionate. Boat length, horsepower, and electric-only restrictions don't stop these people. They take over it with haste. Because of all of you, small boat building for fishing platforms has gone such a long way that the trends now are pretty insane. This video here showcases my run to try and max out the platform for the 14-foot tiny boats. The demand for this project is so huge because of what is all going into it. Insane things are going into this boat, and if you don't do it right, you just end up turning it into a floating death trap, and it won't be a tiny boat. A boat can have all the expensive graphs and turf and LEDs and accessories on it all you want, but unless it's built right from underneath, it's just lipstick on a pig. This video is to show you how not to do that. If you pull this off, then everybody around you in a tournament will hate you. They're gonna wish they could pull this off, but they can't just go and buy this. They're gonna have to build it. This documentary is pretty long, so here are the times for each section that you can cross-reference back and forth to. They're also in the description area with hyperlinks. If you have any questions specific to this build, there's an entire playlist series for it right up here and in the description area below, and there's also some VIP videos that are really in-depth if you want even more information. There's also an entire parts list in the description area of this video, along with an entire parts collection of this boat on our website. Just search V14 Alumacraft. If you like this video, please comment and share, and like and subscribe. It will help this video trend more than you'll ever know. This is an Alumacraft V14. In my opinion, one of the best, if not the best, boat to do one of these projects. It has an insane load capacity. It's built like a tank. It is super stable. It is built correctly from the ground up, even though it's an economy boat. Something that a lot of boat companies will skimp on their economy boats to max out their higher end boats. This is a version 3 Flow-Right Livewell system. This system goes in pretty much all major bass boats. It's a fantastic system. It is a set it and forget it way. And so putting this thing in here is absolutely paramount for what we're trying to achieve. We cut out the back end of the main board section to widen it so we could fit this pump setup in. We fabricated a bracket to make sure we could hold the pump into a section where it would actually make sense, because we still have to run 2 bilge pumps. With everything we have to put back there, the fit will be tight, but we'll be able to pull it off. We fabricate our own little chill box / cooler mod and stick it directly next to the live well. The theory is that if we have enough tubing running through that chill mod with ice, that it will give the edge in cooling the water when it gets really hot out there. Over time, we developed kits that are ultra light to meet the needs of making a full kit while still staying in the boundaries of a boat's safe working capacity. This is our Gen X Monster Kit, a deck and frame combo that is ultra light. By the time we're done with this entire boat, it will be under capacity. We will be able to carry 2 people, a live well, batteries and gear, in a full deck, and it'll still be under the boat's capacity. If I were you and I had this kit, I would install it first to avoid serious complications later on when you're framed and you've gone in too deep. We're going to install a TH Marine oxygenator on the far side of the live well because the nozzle is already going to be aerating the other side. We should give it an even spread of oxygen. We install the overflow, we connect it with the quick locks. This thing is ready to go. It's ready for testing once we get to that point. Complete with 2 bilge pumps, one manual and one manual/auto. We're also going to be installing a CMC Power Tilt. The worth of a power tilt is so important that if you had to choose one accessory as an add-on for your outboard, it should be the tilt. Everything else is just not as useful. Now we're ready to start the framing. The side angle is already there and straight all across the boat. We made it pretty easy to attach the rest of the side angle. And the bench seat in the front was riveted together, but it made it really easy to reuse parts of it. This layout we make here will determine the fate of the boat. How advanced it can be, the features it has, if it can accomplish what we set out to do. We're using 1.5 inch by 1/16 inch thick angled aluminum. We use this because it's so light, yet still strong enough to accomplish all the main points and be structurally sound once we get everything on board. We have 150 feet of this. It's a little over a pound per each 6-foot stick. Then that front piece we took out for the flooring, turns out that's a really good piece of aluminum with under braces already there. Why throw that away? We're going to go ahead and recycle that thing and turn it into the bow plate. And it makes an excellent bow plate. Sets us up for success for other things later. We're also going to make an inner channel so we can run lights underneath that later. That'll be a huge key part of what we do. Before we get any farther in though, we're going to have to install certain things. We're going to go ahead and install this brand new Minn Kota Ultrex Mega DI. If there's any myth that the Tiny Boat Nation has busted, it's the poor man's bass boat myth. People will go through insane lengths to get the edge. Even though people are hindered with both length and horsepower and electric only restrictions, it still doesn't stop them from pimping out their boat to the max. We're going to be skinning the top of this with Gator Skins non-skid, which is stuff that will last for years even out in the elements with no maintenance. We're also going to be sticking on a TH Marine G-Force Eliminator, which makes troubleshooting your trolling motor and overall performance a little bit better. TH Marine also makes a trolling motor pull cord that is really robust and apparently takes care of the issues of those things snapping on you. Never had one snap, but I would imagine if it did, it would really screw up your entire day, because how are you going to disengage the trolling motor? Probably a worthwhile mod to have. We're going to be running Gator Skins in every major part of the boat that we possibly can because of its sheer durability and quality. If you already noticed, the accessory list for this boat is already stacking up. All that adds weight. How we compensate for all that weight and all the batteries added in, including the live well when it's full and the gas tank, is we frame this thing as light as we possibly can. We only use just enough to accomplish the goal. We have plenty of aluminum here to do it. Next step is we are going to run a dry hatch lip. It's a water diversion system that just simply diverts water into other parts of the boat where we don't particularly mind water getting into. That gives us a lot of room to keep all of our key things, like our electronics and our lures and everything else, dry. To take care of the walls, we use 0.040 aluminum sheeting. We have this included in the kit as well. It is light enough to be efficient, yet thick enough to cover the important parts and be useful. We use additional parts of aluminum angle to attach everything out from underneath as we complete the entire system. Having a thin aluminum wall allows for the max amount of capacity inside each compartment, which was a serious problem when we used plastic totes. We lost a lot of actual area room. Now on to the rod locker. Get a lot of questions about this. We're going to have to taper some of these tubes. The goal is to have the tubes taper not so you have to stick your rods inside the taper, which would bend the rod, but so you can get the rod in far enough to where you can back it in so it lays out straight. The inner tubes are going to be able to hold the longest rods, followed by the outer tubes, which are going to be able to hold the shortest. What's more important is you really need a wide locker opening. That is between 4 and 5 feet, the locker opening there, preferably 5 if you can pull it off. That way you don't have to bend your rod to get into the tube, which causes just problems in general, having that tight of a fit. We ran drain tubes everywhere. We ran a false floor down there where we took off the initial floor. We sealed that off with quad foam, so later on we could run drain tubes from all these extra areas where we stuck pour foam, and that would lead into the middle channel. This boat has a nice middle channel surrounded by foam underneath the entire subfloor, which we left in, and we're going to go ahead and add on to that here by doing this setup. We've done this setup in other boats and it's been extremely successful. Before we get too far into this, we're going to go ahead and run the front and back stationary panels. We're going to do this out of fur-rated plywood from the hardware store. This is 1/2 inch fur-rated plywood, and we're going to be running a 3/16 inch hardwood lip. We've already resin coated these strips, if in case you're wondering, for later. We're putting these on the bottom, and this gives us the depth of a 3/4 inch piece of plywood, which would equal the 3/4 inch tubing that we're about to run for the aluminum deck. So when wrapped with carpet, they'll meet the exact height of the aluminum angle and tubed deck. We're also going to route out this spot here. We're using this day box that Nate built me here. It's a pretty sweet little day box, and it's going to come in and out as an easily accessible hatch, so we can troubleshoot anything that goes wrong with the pumps, should anything go wrong with the pumps. Once these are finished off, we're going to seal these with oil-based enamel 2 coats, followed by a copious layer of carpet glue. And the undersides are already sealed with resin. This all fits quite nicely together. It's prepped to fit this day box. This day box will be covered with turf, and the turf will align with the carpet once it's all together and screwed down. When this guy said he wanted the best stuff in a boat, he wasn't messing around. He essentially wants to put an elite level bass boat inside this 14-foot boat. So we got all kinds of crazy stuff. Lithium batteries, the best electronics out there, the best battery charger out there, and a bunch of other stuff. We have 3 10-inch graphs we're going to be installing into this boat, including this cool little HydroWave, which is supposed to spur the fish feeding. He also got a pretty tall riser for the fish finders, which naturally go on a bass boat that more or less has no real deck. It's just all flat. But we have this nice 1 foot tall riser on the bow. And if we just mount this here, it's going to give us just as tall a rise as if we use the stud. That'll help us with savings and help us initially with the frame model, which we'll get in shortly. The key here is this gentleman whose boat this is has a job and a life, and does not lead the tournament angler's life where all they do is pre-fish and mark tree lines and do things like that. It's really hard to compete against somebody like that unless you have the electronics, which today, now, they're good enough to where you can get around that stuff. When they're dialed in right, you can compete against somebody who pre-fished or knows that lake the entire week. You can actually go out there and scan stuff and hold your own. We'll get to those later. They're going to be a serious pain to wire. Right now we're going to worry about structure and how we're going to replace all that styrofoam we gutted out. We're going to go ahead and pour in pour foam around these major sections. We remember we framed in 2 major day boxes up in the front. We're pour foaming around those to solidify the day boxes, so they're pretty solid. When everything's set inside, you can step in these compartments and they won't budge. While we have that thing sectioned out, we're going to have to run these in parts. We're going to going all around here and there, messing around from wiring to framing to adding external mods, because if we don't pre-plan, this won't go right. We added a Seelite pole, which gives the Panoptix Transducer independent movement. That way when it's attached to a trolling motor, you don't have to worry about the spot lock spinning it all around, or worrying about having to turn your motor head off the fish if you have to pivot inside the wind. We're just using some traditional wire grommets from the hardware store, but a lot of people just use through-hole fittings and they work just as well to keep the wire secure when they're coming out of ports like this. The current problem at hand with the Panoptix Live Scope and any other live imaging transducer is there's just no good place to put it. The best thing they came up with are these poles that sometimes they interlock and move up and down. I guess they do alright for what they are. I'm going to be experimenting with a retractable pole platform for this transducer later on in my own personal boat. I'm just not going to risk it on somebody else's, but you can stay tuned for that if you're interested. Conveniently though, this pole gives us an option to actually mount the HydroWave, because we had no place to mount it on the actual trolling motor because the Mega DI transducer is huge and didn't allow for us to do it. Mounting all that stuff was the fun part. Now comes the tedious part of actually running all the wires. We're running wires for everything. We have a million other different wires because all the Hummingbird units require Ethernet ports to link up. There's actually an obscene bajillion wires everywhere. We're going to try and run this tactfully through conduit pipings through this one section where we're going to add pour foam to compensate for the amount of foam taken out. And then for everything else, we're going to run it through a wall going all the way down this main area. When we run this conduit wall, it should give us enough of a space to lead all these wires. When you're running all of these, make sure you buy a cheap label maker from Walmart or Staples, wherever. It will change everything, and it will help you substantially later on if you have to troubleshoot or add any other wires. That way this doesn't become a diagnostic nightmare whenever you have to go back into it. The only place to store the Ethernet port in the black box for the Panoptix, along with all this extra wiring, is right up there in the bow. Everywhere else is already used up. The other wiring linking everything together to the brain is going to have to be ran through braided expandable sleeving down that conduit wall. The braided expandable sleeving is nice, it looms everything correctly, and it doesn't weigh a ton like the PVC piping we used before. Now we're going to make the brain. We're making a box here, so we can make our own switch panel that inside the box. We actually sell these in our store pre-made, just in case you're wondering. You don't have to go through all this, but I'm going to do it for you anyways. We are going to be running 3 individual fuse blocks, but there's one that's standalone and the other one is actually a 6-6-12 split. That will allow us to run 2 actual power units there while grouping all of the negative ends to one specific fuse block. Really cutting down on the amount of space. And that's good because we have a ton of crap to run here. We're going to be running a cutoff switch right in the middle. We're actually going to be running 2. One for the Panoptix units by themselves. I have an entire playlist, a series of electric videos for these projects dedicated on my channel, and the link is right up here in the iCard and also in the description area below if you need to see anything in depth. This is just an overview of what I did here, so you can see that it's possible. This is very much doable at a DIY level. One of the bigger things we're doing is we're sticking Gator Skins Not Skid inside here because rubber, it just does a really good job of protecting yourself from any sort of electrical shorts. And it also gives a little bit of a grommet way when we stick these wires underneath the panel to link to the fuse blocks and the bus bars. We'll have to do most of that once we install the panel, but we can do a lot of it now. At least in the master switch, we can run all the power leads to the fuse blocks themselves. We can prep the negative leads to go to the battery. You never want to run some sort of external ground that mounts to the hull, because then you will make your boat have cancer and it'll be on its way out. It speeds the electrolysis process on an aluminum hull really bad. All positive and negative leads from the panel will eventually end up to the battery. It's 12 volts out, so you'll have to use the appropriate length wire. There are wire sizing charts on the Anchor Marine website and also on the ABYC website. We are also wiring relays, and we will show you that in an in-depth electric video that's coming up shortly after this video is posted. We just wanted to do this first to show you guys what's going on. We have a flow rate system there. There's a Livewell timer. There's the on, off, and timer switch right next to it that controls the entire Livewell unit that we installed way back at the beginning of the boat. Aside from running that 1/6 gain switch panel with a bunch of piggybacked wires that only lead out to one major power wire, we were running 4 individual switches, and we were running the leads from the switches to that panel. We're doing all of that before we drop it in here, because once we drop it in here, we're going to have to start wiring everything else. I was so cramped for wire space that I had to run a conduit through the Livewell just to make everything work, and I had to seal it with 3M5200. Right now I'm running a lead for the power tilt switch, which I also had to run through that conduit in another section just for it to work and pull out the other end. These back panels here that cover the major foam sections, because that's just going to be obscenely heavy once we stack another wood panel on top of it, we're going to go ahead and cut a major section of wood out of those. We're going to do that because we're going to have to run wires somewhere. The amount of electronics is really starting to crunch at me. I'm starting to get that I might have bit off a little more than I can chew. I'm starting to get nervous. So we have to do things I did not want to do. I did not want to disturb any of the foam in the boat. And I did not want to mess up those panels, but hey. Once you reach a point in a boat build, it's like constant problem solving. It's like constantly playing 4D chess with yourself. Have you ever tried playing chess with yourself? It sucks. We ran the 2 YOLOtech leads from 14 gauge wire into 12 gauge wire. 12 gauge wire is about twice as thick as 14 gauge wire. Think about it as a river, where if you're running, 2 braking sections away from one major river, the main part of the river needs to be big enough to supply both those sections. And so we're going to go ahead and link those in like so. We did that for a few things. Also, for anybody wondering what kind of wire this is, no, this is not Romix. This is Anchor Marine tin copper wire. Complete marine, anti-corrosion resistant wire with really thick marine grade rubber coating. It is the best stuff on the market. and it is what is required for anybody who's really taking their wiring job seriously. Nobody else takes pride in their wires the way marine wiring does, and that's that way for a reason. I wouldn't suggest using anything. In marine grade standards, it's kind of different. It's not actually the tin copper that matters, it's the strand count. So that's why you may find a trolling motor or some sort of marine electronics that still has standard copper wiring and you're wondering why. That's why. But true marine grade wiring runs tin copper, so you don't have to worry about the wiring for another 30 years, assuming you do it all right. We're making sure all the leads come from the main end, and we have them all labeled with a label maker. That's a huge thing, making sure all of your wires are labeled. That way when you go to link them up to your brain here, to all the switches, it's more of a seamless process. This is just a sheer amount of small wires that I had to run through that major conduit that we ran into the very top through the Livewell that we had to seal off. And this is all bunched up. We're going to clean it all up with some looming and some zip ties. But we just want to show you what we had to go through there for the process. And we still had to fit a gas tank back in there. We are mounting a 1/2-inch aluminum angle out of our kit. We supply a lot of that so we can use it for various different things. It acts as a really good stopper for your batteries so they don't shift around with a bunch of wires connected to them, which is really bad. Now that we have that out of the way, we kind of got the main conduit place for the batteries put. We're going to start running all those wires the same way we ran it when we initially had the panel before we dropped it in. Now we can run all the extra ones. While they're in there, we're going to go ahead and put ring connectors on them, and then we're going to heat shrink them right there, very tactfully, not trying to melt anything else in the process. And once we do that, we can go ahead and secure them to the appropriate place. The power lead to the fuse block and the ground lead to the bus bar next to the fuse block. This process will take you a while. The wiring slows down everything dramatically. It might seem like everything else goes fairly fast, and then when you get to wiring, it might take you a very long time, weeks. And that's okay, that's natural. Now we are able and ready to wire all those appropriate leads to the appropriate switch panel. We have some going to the piggyback 6-gauge there, and we have some going to the standalone switches in the back. We had to distort one part of the foam. I don't feel too bad because the foam was already distorted before I even pulled off the panel. Next, we are going to link that hole, because we're going to be running a bunch of wires from all the electronics and all the other stuff with this giant TH Marine grommet, which is used on bigger boats to run the steering cable leads and any other additional wires that go, such as the wiring harness for the motors. In case you're wondering, we have all these parts in our store. We have links in the description area below for everything we use in this boat. We have a complete parts collection for this boat on our website, so you should check out all those things if you need to. We're running about a 2-inch hole here with a hole saw right through the splash guard of the back of the boat. We're going to go ahead and file that down and prep it so there's no knife edge to fray the wires that we're going to run through that section. We're running all the cluster from the back. There's almost as annoying of a cluster in the back as there was in the front.
High-speed transducer.
We're trying to wrap the wires as neatly as we can in a bundle, that way they don't cause problems and mess with each other later. A good friend of mine told me to bundle those wires like that because it will help with the way everything works. There's so much wires and there's no way to keep them separated, so the potential for RF interference is really high, and that paranoids me because there's no other real way to run them. And if the RF interference messes the graphs from like actually getting consistent readings, there's going to be a big problem. Another giant advantage with running tin coppered wire is that there's a little bit of RF shielding from the tin copper itself. In fact, they make tin copper braided expandable sleeving for shielding just for the same actual purpose. So there's a pretty good chance that all this will work. We just have to have confidence because we're in a pretty deep right now. We have to be doing some insane things. Part of those insane things, in fact, one of the final prep, is linking everything to these batteries. These are 3 Dakota lithium batteries. These are some of the industry leading lithium batteries out there. They're about the same size as a Group 29 or Group 30, but they only weigh like 29-30 pounds a piece. And that's huge considering we have a serious weight cap to stick to, at 1,200 pounds with person's motor and gear. and a lot of that is often ate up by the batteries, where 3 batteries, lead acid or AGM, can weigh as much as like a full-grown man. With here, it weighs a little more like a small child, and we really need that weight advantage to pull this whole thing off. We are running giant rubber grommets. You can get those packets from Harbor Freight, or we have them on our store, on my Amazon, and on our web store. They're there all day, and we're running them through that .040 aluminum sheeting. And that's how we're running most of the major wire leads from the switch panel and for the trolling motor wire into there. We'll also be running some really awesome products from Pro Charging System, some of the leading industry standard stuff. They have the best setup to charge lithium batteries out there. And by best, I mean the next best competitor is like a far distant second. We're going to be running them through like the conduits we made up there. We had to make some additional conduits, and we had to be really careful with how we're running them there, because we're going to have to put foam in that actual section once we have all these ran. But we're not going to do it. We're not going to pour foam into that section until we know how much wiring and how deep we're in. I'm looming all the wires and securing them as I go to reduce the spaghetti effect that generally stresses a bunch of people out when it comes to wiring. We are also running the battery optimization system, which is Bluetooth compatible. It's a standalone battery stabilizer. It makes sure you have constant power between all the batteries linked to the unit. We are also running TH Marine Hydra 5-point terminals, and that's how we're going to be able to run so many leads from that switch panel from all those different fuse blocks to here, and it's still going to be successful. What you want to avoid is stacking ring connector on top of each other. Ring connector on top of ring connector on top of ring connector causes resistance, and it also has like a pyramid effect where the bottom ring connector sucks all the power, and then you just kind of get robbed all the way up. So these really help. I just want to point that out, and these are also in the description area below. Now for the battery connecting all those wires to the batteries kind of sucks. It took a really long time.
Shit, man, that was a lot of bullshit. Finally. We still have the meter gauge to hook up, but we have to do something to modify one of the extensions.
We also have what's called the CT unit here, which is what allows us to read lithium batteries. Would you believe that standard setups, you cannot get an accurate battery readout, not even with any of the other like stock digital gauges. The only reason we can even get an accurate readout now is because we have this system, and it is attached to the fuel gauge, which is specifically meant to run with lithium batteries. We have a complete video on this entire setup, talking about all the features and the trifecta that these 3 things, the charger, the fuel gauge, and the BOSS system have in tandem that make this boat run seamlessly. Did all of that exhaust you? Rightfully so if it did. Take a few days off after you do the electric just to clear your mind, and then get back to it, because now we're going to put on the deck. You can skip this part if you don't care for it, but we wanted to black out the deck with a rubber matting. This is Gator Skin Soft Touch. It is pretty awesome stuff. It's really thin rubber matting that folds like tape.
What you have here is all the electric. That's the Panoptix unit, the black box, and here is the Ethernet box over here. And all the wiring pluses that are ran through the boat, through the side conduit wall, all labeled back there. Man, I need to get more labels. The list never ends. Just what a crap show. See all those wires underneath there, and then these wires here, those all have to go in there, and I have to tactfully put this in there too. And so there's just a lot of places where this wire is just going to be bundled up, and so that's what this little shim of a sheet metal thing is for. It's not under support, it's there so I can tactfully mount this clusters of like spools of wire in such a way down the middle channel that it won't be a problem. What's really good is the wire to the battery charger actually ran all the way through, was long enough to run here, and so I had the battery charger port right there, plus the battery fuel gauge right there, and so that'll look really clean right there. And then we'll have just a little port there to hide these wires underneath there. There's no other way to do it other than how we're going to do it now.
We're going to go ahead and take care of some of the last minute pre-wiring and some other things before we pour in the rest of the foam to solidify this front piece. Once we stick all this pour foam in, it'll have more foam than it initially had in the front bench with that styrofoam. And it'll encase it and strengthen those day boxes so you can literally step in them once everything is cured. They're super solid, they're not going to go anywhere, and they won't shutter loose. We are now moving on to the lid builder system, part of our Gen X kit. In this kit, we give enough aluminum and enough essential brackets and pieces to allow any DIYer with high skill and simple tools to make aluminum hatches without using a welder. We are really proud of this lid system because it empowers the average DIYer with high skills and just basic tools to be able to make a complex lid system, where before, even if you were a really skilled DIYer, you couldn't put together a lid system with basic tools to do what this one does. It just wasn't possible. You needed a welder, but now you don't. This core piece is the key to attaching pretty much the entire front. This needed to be done before anything else, but now that we have this out, we can measure the proper spots for the daybox hatches and for the rest of the hatches. This is a .063 sheet of aluminum. You can get these from a metal shop. Generally, you can get the entire sheet for fairly cheap. If you're running into trouble with that though, we do sell kits that give you sheets pre-cut, and you should be able to cut any sort of lid you need out of them. Now that we have those traced properly, we make sure to label those bottom and top from the frames to the actual sheets. That way you don't get it mixed up, because that will cause you big problems. Assuming you have it all lined up, it should look like this when you're done. Use a series of countersink rivets and countersink bits to make sure it's all flat. The rivet ends are hid inside the tubing, so you can't see anything. And after you carpet or you turf these, it just looks like a standard hatch. Everybody will think it's welded, even though it's not. We designed this deck specifically for turf. We have those hatches fitting so close together within a 1/8 inch gap, because when you do that, turfing those hatches looks absolutely amazing. We're also a big proponent of self-routing turf. We self-routed the cheap Amazon turf, but we're not going to use that for the deck this time. I did that on my boat, I learned my lesson. But it will look really good underneath where there's no actual traffic. We are also a big fan of just HydroTurf in general. Whether it's pre-routed or lined, we have it all in our store. You should check it out. Different types for different everything. This is Orthodeck specific. Really good high quality turf, because if you're going to self-route DIY some stuff, it needs to be the right kind of turf or it just doesn't do it right. We are attaching the first 3 lids to this core. That way when we sit it down, it'll be perfectly spaced, and then we can go ahead and anchor the core to the middle of the section where we pre-ran those wires and dumped all that foam in. So the spacing went right. That's good. If that got screwed up, then we'd be really having some problems. I had to cut out that little front piece there because there was no other way to actually get the screws down into the bottom tubing to secure this whole thing. That's why that little front piece is missing. But you can see all that right there before we attach the front piece on. Make sure everything's good to go. All the wiring seems to be legit. The foam is in the right place. The drain tubes are in the right place. For any of the bigger hatches, which there are 5 major hatches that are pretty big, we're going to be using this hat channel underneath each of those hatches, like so. After that's all attached and everything's clean, we go ahead and we stick the rest of the turf on and finish the routing job. I actually have really good footage of this entire deck being pieced together, and then it got botched. But the deck came out really nice using the same method we just showed you now. We've taken care of the front, we've taken care of the middle, now it's the back that we have to worry about. We still got a ton of wires, and we have transducers to hook up. We're going to go ahead and run these stern mount plates. It comes with an entire kit of everything you need, including a scouring pad if you have anti-fouling paint. It also comes with an alcohol swab to clean out the surface so you can mount these like so. After following the Hummingbird website on the Facebook group, they said to space them just like this for the high-speed transducer and for the Mega SI transducer. And then we're going to fit lights right in between there, because that's the one place that they can go. It's like perfect placing. Seriously, can't make that up. We're going to mount the high-speed transducer. The good thing about the stern pad is you can mount transducers and they can undergo pretty high heavy water pressure without actually having to mess up your hole or screw through the bottom of your hole, which at this point would be devastating because there's no way we can actually mount a successful back. Getting all of that squared away took a lot longer than I thought. If anybody wonders what takes the longest, it's right when you think you're about done. Seems like you're never done. There's always some little odd and tweak you have to do. But eventually we get done and we move on to bigger things, like these Gatorbak bunks with plush lights installed in them. Now we're really close to completing everything. All we have to do is go take it on the water and test it and make sure everything works. It all looks like it's going to work, but I tell you, you go and you take this thing on the water, and then you just don't know. Meet Danny. This is his boat. He ended up selling his giant Ranger and just now wants to be a tiny boater. So that's alright with me. One of the giant advantages to having a tiny boat is that it's not a giant money pit once it's built. It's only expensive during the beginning, and then after that it's extremely low maintenance to run a tour life boat like this. Everything looks good, everything's ready, let's get it going. Let's see what it's made of.
This is ridiculous. This is like, we're both heavy individuals. Like, look at this. Again, with the tipping, it's like the boat barely rolling.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like right in the edge.
We probably both stand on the edge.
Right, I mean, that's like 500 pounds of people.
Yeah.
And the boat's what? That's ridiculous. So, to put it mildly,
He liked it, and so did I. It planed 2 of us, which is just under 500 pounds of people, plus a full live well, plus all gear, and it picked up right on point with that 25 horsepower Yami. That was a brand new F21. He even got a first fish. It's not the fish we wanted, but hey, any fish to christen the boat is a fish well caught.
he'll make it. He's gonna make it. He's gonna make it! Alright, we'll check on it. Oh, that's fine, yeah, the liquid. Dang it.